Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Innovation in Emerging Markets, Asia and LATAM. This event is co-hosted by Dr. Klaas, David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies in Harvard, the Emerging Market Institute at Cornell, and the School of Management at Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, and also the Emerging Market Research Network. My name is Juana Garcia. I am Associated Professor from the School of Management in Universidad de los Andes, and I was visiting a scholar last year in Dr. Class. And I will be the moderator with Lourdes Casanova, Senior Lecturer, Gail and Rob Cañizares, Director of the Emerging Market Institute at Johnson Graduate School of Management in Cornell. I am pleased to introduce today's speakers. The book presentation will be held by Anne Miró, Faculty Fellow at Emerging Market Institute at Johnson Graduate School of Management at Cornell, Fernanda Cahen, Professor of Innovation and International Business at FEI Brazil, and our four wonderful panelists that will be Yu Shen, Associate Professor at Institute of Science and Technology, Statistics and Analysis, Chinese Academy of Science and Technology for Development, CASTED, Ravi Ramamurthy, University Distinguished Professor of International Business and Strategy and Director of Center Emerging Markets and Northeastern University, Moacir Oliveira, full professor and head of the Business Administration Department at Universidad de Sao Paulo, and Veneta Andonova, associate professor and dean School of Management, Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. Before, I have a few logistics items to cover. First, we are going to record today's seminar, and you can see it later at the Dr. Class YouTube channel. Second, we hope to see you in another lectures and series at Dr. Class, and you can find the information on the chat. And finally, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. Feel free to send some questions, comments through the Q&A tab. We will be answering the question at the end of the session, but feel free to submit during any time of the presentations. Okay, what we have today. Today, we want to invite a conversation about diverse types of innovation in emerging markets. And also we want to present some findings of the book From Copycats to Leaders, Innovation from Emerging Markets, where some of us participated writing chapters. Ana and Fernanda will present the framework of the book, and then with Lourdes, we will moderate the conversation with our wonderful panelists whom explore different approaches of innovation in emerging markets, concepts as reverse or frugal innovation with cases from China, India, Brazil, and Colombia. So without any further information, I would like to give the floor to Lourdes Casanova.
Thank you very much, Juana. It was 1 year ago that I visited Dr. Klaas at Harvard University, and we decided to launch this event. And it was actually the day before Harvard closed the university. And I remember rushing to the airport thinking that Cornell was going to close again as it happened. So thank you, Juana. Thank you, Jimena, Gabriel, and all the team for putting this together. So today, as Juana mentioned, we'll be having the conversation, and also we will be presenting the book. The book is the result of the collaboration in the Emerging Multinationals Research Network that was born 5 years ago, with the collaboration of Professor Anabela Davila from Tec de Monterrey in Mexico, Professor Juana Garcia, the hostess of this event, and Veneta Andonova, the Dean of the School of Management at Universidad de los Andes, Professor Moacir Miranda de Oliveira, who is the director of the business administration at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, Professor Fernanda Cahen at FEI in Brazil, Professor Diego Finkelstein from Universidad de los Andes Universidad de San Andrés, in Argentina, and my colleague from the Emerging Markets Institute, the faculty fellow Anne Miró, and myself. We have worked together in a number of projects, collaborating writing chapters in the books written by members of the network, presented in different conferences, articles, and now the first book that is coming out this month, the book published by Cambridge University Press. And also we are preparing a second book on unicorns around the same thing, unicorns, technology in emerging markets. In the different projects, we have invited a number of scholars from all over the world. Among them, Professor Ravi Ramamurthy, director of the Center of Emerging Markets at Northeastern University, and a coach and an inspiration for many of us. And also, in this case, Kastet, and I'll introduce Professor Yu Chen in a minute, from China. So we are delighted with this collaboration and looking for more. So we are going to now present the book. So the editors of the book are Fernanda and Miru and myself. But as I said before, it's a global project. We have worked together for a full year, 18 authors from 8 countries in 3 continents. Also, I want to highlight the fact that this month is Women History Month. Have the three editors, female editors, and also half the authors are women. So we are very delighted to have diversity at its core. So here is the collaboration also with Copenhagen Business School, Professors Peter Gammeltoft and Max van Zethuis, Professor Ram Mudambi from Fox School of Business at Temple University, and also University of Victoria, Christine Brandel in Canada. So again, this is the result of conversations, collaboration, and feeding each other's research during more than a year. And I'll pass the word now to Fernanda Caen, who will present also the main themes of the book.
Okay. Thank you, Lourdes. Could you share the 3rd slide, please?
Yeah, I'm sharing the 3rd slide. Do you see it?
Yes, and Lourdes, could you put the full screen for the presentation?
I am in full screen.
Yeah, not.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am in full screen here. And sharing is paused. Bring your shared window to the front. Okay, so I'm going to do it again. Let's see. Sorry about that. Is this now fine?
Yes, please.
Okay, and in my screen is full screen. Sorry, Fernanda.
No problem. Thank you, Lourdes. Thank you to the audience. Thank you, Juana, for organizing this event and everybody. It's an honor to be here. My name is Fernanda Caen, and I am one of the editors of this book. So talking about the goal of the book, we wanted to understand innovation in emerging markets, its drivers, types of different kinds of innovation, outcomes of innovation. And we cover the most prominent emerging markets in the world and also important cases of emerging markets leading companies. So we have chapters on China, India, also discussions on South Korea, from Asia. From Latin America, we have chapters on Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico. We also have a chapter on the Balkans, which cover 11 countries on the Western Europe region. And from Africa, we have case studies of digital companies from Nigeria and Kenya. And from the beginning of the writing process, we were concerned about the storyline of the book, since we had so many authors from different backgrounds, as Lourdes presented, from different institutions, different countries. And the storyline was something important. We didn't want standalone chapters. So we have 3 main questions to guide the discussions in the book. The first question was what drives innovation in emerging markets? The second question was what types of innovation were really happening in emerging markets? And the last one is what are the outcomes of innovation for these countries and beyond? So in the end, these three questions led to a framework of analysis. And now I pass the floor to Enmiro, who is also editor of the book, and will explain the framework we created for the purpose of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. And Lourdes, could you share the last slide? Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, as Fernanda has just said, we have three main questions around which to organize the framework for the book. What drives innovations? That's basically part one of the book. What are the types of innovation? Part two. And then what are the outcomes? We also follow the broad definition of innovation. That is, we went definitely beyond the traditional R&D based innovation and all the issues about the matrix into including managerial process, business model, and also innovation for local needs. And I'll come back to that. And the framework also, I must say, is at the bridge between the theory, and actually most of the chapters are written by academics. And we also have as some sort of underlying base, the national system of innovation. So we are at the interconnection between the theory and the practice, because the analysis is actually largely based on industry, country, and firm case studies. So the part one, what drives innovation? That's the first pillar, if you want, of the framework. And the response, in a way, resides in the cases. In some cases, the innovation is driven by the traditional factors, the innovation capability, the competition within the industries, and we are examining it through different chapters. And they are actually within the first round, if you want, on the left side of the screens. We look at the role of the government, for instance, a particular example being China, which may be presented to you today by one of the authors. We look also at basically the role of the Indian system of innovation and its impact on pharmaceutical industry in China, and industry and firms. And that takes me to the other driver of innovation, which is the fact that others innovate out of necessity because of the local challenges. They turn these challenges into business opportunity. And in this particular case, for instance, we zoom on the case of e-commerce firms and a little bit of fintech example in chapter 5, for instance. And so there is that aspect of the challenges, voids in the systems, and also the demand for society. That's the first pillar of the framework. The second one is what types of innovation? Definitely we go beyond the traditional product type and process type innovation and so on, because we are working on emerging markets, and there forms of innovation which are particularly prevalent and on which we devote particular attention are, for instance, business model innovation, organizational innovation, but also reverse innovation. And Ravi Ramamurthy is going to make a presentation about this very interesting phenomenon, so to speak. And we have also frugal innovation, and Moacir, who is also one of the presenters, we also share his thoughts on these issues. So there we zoom, in the case of emerging markets, on innovation which have been in a way more prevalent in this context than in more advanced economies. And then of course, the third pillar, the outcomes. And that was to some extent perhaps the most, and that still is the most challenging part. How do you measure innovation? How do you measure the performance? So we look at the country performance and the firm performance. But to do that, we use a traditional metrics, the Global Innovation Index, the patents, the R&D expenditure, and so on. What is the conclusion? Whether we are talking about country or enterprises, there has been a substantial move up from emerging market on the innovation ladder. So that is the first conclusion. But the second one is of the conclusion that we have is, to some extent, there are some innovation, which we have detailed in the previous chapters, which unfortunately go below the radar because there are no metrics and quantitative metrics. So we point out that aspect. So in conclusion, this book is not an exhaustive examination of the issues, but more we try to illustrate with a specific case study. And at the end of the day, the diversity of the cases shows that basically there is a solid and authentic and a original culture innovation in emerging market. And that's the reason why, and there is definitely innovation taking place in all its form in emerging markets, hence the title of the book, From Copycats to Leaders. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Anne and Fernanda. And we'll move now to Juana, who will introduce the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Fernanda, Lourdes, and Anne. I would like to introduce Ravi Ramamurthy, who have been working for many years in emerging markets and the concept of reverse innovation and the case of India. Ravi, we would like to hear from you, maybe, what are the main drivers of innovation and what can the developed economies learn from innovations in emerging markets? And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juana. Thank you, Lourdes, for organizing this event. I hope my slide is showing up.
Yes.
Terrific. Juana, in response to your question, I thought I'd focus on what are some of the key drivers of innovation in the emerging markets, and specifically on this concept of reverse innovation. This is a topic on which I've been working now for more than a dozen years. And the idea is really very simple. For most of the last 250 years since the Industrial Revolution, most innovations have gone from rich countries to poor countries. About 10 or 15 years back, I thought we are now entering a period in which we may see innovations also going in the other direction. Now, those of you who know the history know that if you go back before the Industrial Revolution, many innovations came from countries like China, India, Egypt, and so on, to the developed, what we now call the developed countries. But in the recent history, this is relatively a new phenomenon, and I think it's going to become more prevalent as we go forward. There was a lot of skepticism when we first published our article on this topic in the journal called Global Strategy Journal. But I think in the last 10 or 12 years, the evidence, if anything, suggests that there is more of it going on now than there was in the past. And the question is why? So that takes us to the question of what are the drivers of reverse innovation. I'm going to give you focus on three drivers. And the first one is resource scarcity. Now, of course, all countries have scarcity of resources. All companies operate with scarce resources. But this problem is particularly acute in poor countries. So out of that necessity of having scarce resources, you begin to see innovation. And the one example that we've written about is healthcare. If you think about the problem of healthcare in poor countries, they have, like India, which is what our research was based on, you got more than 1 billion people. You don't have enough doctors. You don't have enough hospitals. You don't have enough medical equipment. The resources available are enough to take care of maybe 5% of the people who need care. So tremendous pressure to make better use of all of these resources. And so we thought, as we struggled with how to improve the performance of healthcare all over the world, including in the developed countries, where are you likely to find creative new ideas for delivering healthcare more efficiently, where you bring it to more people at lower cost while still maintaining quality? Because healthcare is a field in which you can't compromise on quality. You can't say, half the patients will survive the procedure, but that's all you get because you're paying so little, right? You still have to achieve high standards of quality. And we found in India, several hospitals were doing this in a number of different fields. And I don't have time to get into how they do it. But the bottom line is we thought these hospitals that we studied in India that, for instance, do open heart surgery for about $2,000 a patient, and yet have the same outcomes of some of the best hospitals in the US. We thought of these hospitals as really the Fords and Toyotas of healthcare. Just like Ford and Toyota revolutionized manufacturing, we think these hospitals have the answer to how you can deliver a lot more with a lot less. So we wrote about that in this article in Harvard Business Review. And then we were told, well, can you bring any of those ideas to countries like the US? So we did some further work and actually studied examples in the US where these ideas like the ones you see in India being adopted quite effectively by healthcare organizations in the US. So we published a book with Harvard Business Review Press called Reverse Innovation in Healthcare, wrote an accompanying Harvard Business Review article as well. The same idea of resource scarcity, I found also can be used to understand why some countries, some poor countries, poorer than the US or poorer than Western Europe, were so much more successful in fighting COVID than the developed countries. And the short answer is that they, again, don't have enough hospital beds or ICU beds to say, oh, it's okay if people get sick, we'll take care of them in the hospital. But they just don't have enough hospitals. So it's much more important in some of the emerging markets to control the spread of the infection rather than to say, we'll take care of them if they get sick. And so we found that there were a number of practices being used in some of the emerging markets that explained why they were able to contain the problem before it became a major health challenge. And we thought, and I thought actually, this was the work I did by myself, that some of these ideas could be brought to the US and countries like the US. And so we created a website called Reverse Innovation to Fight COVID-19, which has about 50 ideas that we picked up, identified, that worked very effectively in the emerging markets that could be brought to countries like the US or Western Europe. Again, the same idea, it's just resource scarcity driving innovation in emerging markets that has tremendous value also for developed markets like the US. A second type of driver is a little different from the resource scarcity argument, and that is ease of use and flexibility. And for that, I take this example of GE's EKG machine. What you see in this picture is the high-end version, the traditional GE product, about $15,000, very sophisticated, very accurate, also very expensive for poor countries. But it's not just that it's unaffordable for poor countries. It's also in many ways inappropriate for poor countries because it's bulky. And in poor countries, very often patients can't go to the hospital. You have to find a way to take the hospital to the patient. So you need portability of the product. You also need to make the product simpler to use because you don't have the very sophisticated operators. And it has to be battery backed because you don't always get reliable power supply. Sometimes you go to villages where there may not be any electric power supply. So you can't use the GE product the way it is. GE found a local competitor, created a product like this portable compact EKG machine. GE then learned from that, improved it, and found that actually this kind of a product had many applications in the developed countries as well. So this is a second type of a driver, I think, in many examples you see where making the product simpler to use, sturdier, more flexible, and more versatile. These are all features that are particularly valuable in emerging markets. But then having created such products, you find you can also sell them in other parts of the world. And you see here an illustration of how having a portable EKG machine is really the answer for a poor country like India. The last example, and I'm going to finish with this slide, is where you have leapfrogging by the emerging markets. Whatever the reasons are for the leapfrogging, and I go into that in some more detail in the article I showed in the beginning, but once you leapfrog, whatever you do in the emerging markets is also relevant to all countries in the world because you've leapfrogged to the frontier of the field. And in a few cases, emerging markets have done that. And the two examples I would cite is Embraer in aircraft or Huawei in telecom equipment. These companies are now at the frontier in their industries. They are not just playing catch up. They have caught up, and now they're very much in a position to lead the development of their industries. In 5G, Huawei is now a world leader, no longer a company playing catch up. Other examples where you have leapfrogging are e-payments, electronic payments. M-Pesa, we know in Kenya was one of the pioneers of this idea of using electronic transactions to make payments. Again, it's a case of leapfrogging into the use of using the cellular platform to provide this kind of a service. Once you invent that in Kenya, it's really relevant to all countries. In fact, I would say we're playing catch up now in the US. We're trying to get to e-payments on a level that you see in a country like Kenya, you don't see in the US. The last example uses social media, where something like TikTok or apps like WeChat are really now pioneering new kinds of social media, not just copying social media from other countries. And so then any innovation that comes in that area will be an innovation of relevance to all countries in the world. We're talking now of super apps in the US, and we're talking super apps in India, which didn't exist, inspired by the Chinese model. So I think these are back, to your question, one, I think these are some of the unique factors that can drive reverse innovation from the emerging markets. With that, I turn it back to Lourdes, I think, who will introduce the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Ravi. A very interesting overall view on types of innovation that we see in emerging markets and how this reverse innovation has turned around and now is also from emerging markets to the developed world. So with this overall introduction, I'll pass the word to Professor Moacir de Miranda Oliveira Jr., as Juana said, is the director of the Business Administration Department at the University of Sao Paulo. And also, I would like him to expand on the question that in spite of everything, Brazil leads in agriculture technology, in banking technology, in e-government, is one of the world leaders in spite of economic volatility. So what should Brazil to continue to jump ahead and become and have the role that the country deserves in the world? Thank you very much, Moacir. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lourdes and Juana, for organizing this great event. It's an honor to be here with so many colleagues, so many old friends. Great to see you all. I will show briefly some slides and then back to your question, Lourdes. Let me do this here. I have just a few slides to show you. As Lourdes explained, I'm a professor at the University of Sao Paulo. We have been doing research on emerging markets and innovation for some time. What is interesting, Brazil is under an economic crisis for some years, but despite the economic, political, and this recent sanitary crisis, the innovation ecosystems in Brazil has demonstrated some kind of resilience. Nowadays, according to the Brazilian Association of Startups, we have 12,700 startups. It's a number of 2020, 27% growth compared to 2018. We have 404 business incubators. And what is interesting in this number is that if you look back to 10 years ago, most of these business incubators were more connected with the government or public universities. And now most of them are connected with private companies or corporations. And the 11 unicorns appeared in Brazil since 2018. So in 2 years, from the 18 to 20, 18 unicorns of valuation over $1 billion had come to the light in the country as well. What is a kind of paradox, because the economy is not doing well, but the innovation ecosystems, it is performing. We are following the investments on corporate venture and innovation hubs, and we have found over 100 corporate ventures initiatives in the country, like Cubo from Itaú Bank, that is the largest bank in the country, Inovabra, another very important bank, Oxygen from Porto Seguro, Braskem Labs, chemical firm, and others. Here, Lourdes, one of your questions is being a kind of answer. For example, Brazil has a leading position in banking, automation, IT for banking, and so on. And the two largest Brazilian banks, the Itaú Bank and the Bradesco Bank, are investing a lot in these corporate venture initiatives. All of them incubating over 100 firms connected with the banking industry or with the industry of their main corporate clients. Is a way these large corporations, like the largest private banks in Brazil, are competing and surfing this new wave of startups and the unicorns. In addition to that, Brazil is one of the leaders in attracting investments in Latin America, 73% of investment in dollars, and in the past decade, the country raised more than 50% of the total volume of venture capital investment in Latin America. We did some research on this subject. 1.5 years ago, we launched a book on startups and innovation ecosystems and emerging markets. One part of the book focused on the startups, innovation, funding, background of the entrepreneurs, internationalization of Brazilian startups. And the second part focused on innovation ecosystems, the role of the business environment, technological parks, incubators, accelerating, and university entrepreneurship in the country. And our contribution for the book was in 2 chapters. We did a research on reverse innovation, strongly based on the approach Professor Ravi Ramamurthy presented to us. Ravi has been an inspiration for our research for a long time. And we did this reverse innovation, the role of local party in emerging markets. And according to our research, reverse innovation is happening in Brazil. Some Brazilian subsidiaries of foreign multinational in Brazil are doing research not just for being applied in the Brazilian market, but also for all the Latin America and other emerging markets that have some similarities with the Brazilian market. And we also did a research on frugal innovation in Brazilian multinationals. We did that, and we discovered that there are a lot of investments besides the Brazil example Ravi presented to us. We found the frugal innovation in Natura, for example, frugal innovation led by sustainable innovation strategy, very connected, but with following the principles presented by Professor Ramamurthy, and also the frugal innovation pulled by high technology catch-up strategy. Nubank is the largest Brazilian unicorn, over $10 billion valuation, and they use this frugal innovation in order to have a very, very cheap operation and a very affordable prices for the services of the bank. And these are some examples we use it in we discovered that. And just to finish this presentation, we did some kind of other researches on the subject, and it's not, my slides are not working, so I'm going to stop the share. I'd like to make a final comment on this presentation, connecting with the very, very difficult moment we're facing in the world, but especially in Brazil. Brazil is in the most difficult moment of the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and we are doing research connected with the subject as well. I have a PhD candidate that is doing research on the business model transformation of startups under the COVID pandemic. So it's a way to understand how these startups are adapting their business model, several dimensions of the business model to deal with these difficult circumstances. Another PhD candidate is doing a research on triple helix innovation for ventilators in Brazil. This candidate is a professor at the University of the State of Amazonas, and there is a partnership of the government, the University of the State of Amazonas, and the Honda Motors, the subsidiary of Honda motorcycles. They have the largest plant of motorcycles of Honda in the world is located in Manaus, at the very heart of the Amazon forest. And they are doing this triple helix innovation to develop ventilators to fight against the COVID. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It is great to be here with you. And I give the word to my great friend, Professor Juana Garcia. Thank you, Juana. Thank you, Lourdes.
Thank you, Moacir, and thank you for the cases, and also to try the conversation to our recent normality. I don't know if, Lourdes, do you want to try the connection with China, or do we continue with
Please go ahead with Veneta. We are trying different ways, by phone, by WeChat, by different ways. Okay. And we are trying, so please go ahead and introduce Veneta.
Okay. Okay, Veneta will talk about technology-driven new ventures in Latin America, and also innovation driven by the social and environmental challenges. Our joint work together with Veneta in the chapter of the book was about the link between, the link between social needs and the creation of innovation opportunities in emerging markets. Our focus was on Colombia, where armed conflict and post-conflict scenario drove the pursuit of innovative solutions, both to military but also to business organizations. So the chapter explores cases that show how social demands create opportunities for deep transformations in societies. Okay, Veneta, the floor is yours, and you can share more about our work.
Yes, thank you, Juana, for the introduction. I'd like to say hello to all the panelists, and it's my greatest pleasure to share the work which I have been developing with Juana over the years, but also I'd like to mention two other colleagues of ours, Andres Guerrero, who is the director of the Uniandes Center for Entrepreneurship. He is instrumental in this research line. And also Maria Emilia Correa, she is one of the founders of Sistema B, one of the organizational ways of thinking about the planetary limits and the sustainability from a business perspective. So we all have been working together essentially to understand a bit better what is going on in Latin America in terms of innovation, but in very specific domains. And I'd like to say that Latin America scores very high in happiness studies traditionally. It has great climate, great culture, but somehow the optimism has been lost in the latest years in terms of the economic and social progress. And with this presentation, we wanted to offer an honest, but also a somewhat optimistic outlook of the region. And I will start, I have only 3 slides here, and I'd like to start with the first one, which is basically to say, if you look at this very small group of high-tech ventures that have a valuation of over $1 billion and that are private, and these are called the unicorns. They are rare, and they're basically considered to be one of the indicators of the maturity and preparedness of the local entrepreneurial ecosystems in terms of its capability to absorb technology and turn it into business and value creation opportunity. What you see here is a great concentration in terms of unicorns across what Lourdes Casanova and Anne Miró has called Emerging 20. In their method, they basically singled out the largest 20 emerging economies, put a magnifying glass on them, and have been working over the years to understand what is going on in this particular subset of countries. So what we did here was precisely that: use Lourdes and Anne's approach to understanding emerging countries and look at their capability of creating unicorns. And what a surprise. Half of them basically belong to China and Asia Pacific. And Latin America scores really low in this domain. And I will focus now a bit on what we think might be the drivers behind that. And I will go to this second slide, which tries to look at what is the difference sector-wise between the capacity of producing those unicorns that we are so excited to study between advanced economies and emerging economies. And what we see is a pattern in relation to the sectors where the unicorns from emerging economies have been relatively more frequent when compared to the unicorns from developed economies. And there is no surprise in discovering that most of the unicorns that focus on artificial intelligence, for example, or cybersecurity, belong to countries such as US, UK, or Israel, and China, in particular, in terms of the emerging world. But also, this is kind of where I'd like to call your attention and send a message of optimism for the emerging economies, but most importantly for Latin America within the emerging world, is the fact that there are really there is evidence for strong performance in terms of technology and innovation driven unicorns in some other sectors, which are so important. And these are related to education in particular, and logistics systems, e-commerce, and direct-to-consumer platforms. And all these, we believe, are actually opportunities to leapfrog for many of the Latin American regions, as in these domains, technology is used to compensate for some long-standing problems and deficiencies in terms of equality. Equal access to high quality education has been a real pain for Latin America, and also in terms of access to infrastructure and commerce. And here with Juana and Andres, we have looked into two examples of companies, of unicorns, one from Argentina, Mercado Libre, which is the largest e-commerce business of the region, has been also the longest standing in terms of Latin American unicorns. It's not original in the sense that its business model is not born in Argentina or Latin America for that matter, but it's an amazingly effective implementation of well-tried and well-understood business model that emerged elsewhere. And Rappi is the other case, which is a delivery service which connects a platform, which connects the businesses that sell normally food with the clients who don't want to cook or maybe want to have a good delivered at their home. Therefore, Rappi connects these two sites into an app that aspires to become a super app. At least this is the goal that we have uncovered. So what I'd like to say here is that much of these innovation-driven unicorns in Latin America are not really so original in the ways they approach the business opportunity, but they're very effective, very resilient to scale up and capitalized on a great business model, making the relevant adaptations. So I think this is an important a message to be outlined from the region. And with that, I'd like to make a bridge to what Juana mentioned in the intro. And that is, Latin America has a very challenging institutional, social setup. And probably one of the countries where things are taken to the extreme was Colombia during these decades of armed conflict. So what we looked at with Juana and Maria Emilia in one of the chapters of the book was precisely what is going on in terms of innovation if on the top of everything you also have to build peace in a country that is stricken by long-standing injustice and armed conflict. And we took Colombia as a case study because we believe this is a great context for understanding the resilience of the business models that are born under extreme circumstances. And this is common in emerging markets, as Ravi mentioned, and also Moacir mentioned the word resilience when referring to Latin America and Brazil. Certainly that's the message we bring here. So we look at two very important companies, Colombian companies, one bank that has a foundation, Fundación Bancolombia. They essentially created a new business models for unbanked rural population that was suffering, that there were victims by the armed conflict in areas of the country where government forces were unable of controlling basically the monopoly on violence. So what they created is a model where the client can lend money to the agricultural producers. These are very small, tiny land hosts that have a lot of problems funding their operation. And basically it is a banking system for unbanked rural communities that is to some degree sponsored by the clients who are driven not only by the seek of an interest, but also by the social kind of purpose behind the model. And it started as a rather small project at the foundation and became gradually a core product for the bank, coming basically to the center of the banking ways of approaching, let's say, the opportunity from the business perspective. And the other case we'd like to mention here of another company that has basically signed to the shared value paradigm and bringing the social impact and business model innovation that shares and gives opportunity to those deprived of it is Postobón. What is unique about Postobón, and that's the largest soft drink company in Colombia, way beyond traditional global multinationals. So one of the strategies that they have adopted is called Hit Social. Basically, the fruit contents in their drinks and juices comes from smallholds, local producers who are empowered in the way they purchase and they work with them and they purchase their fruit, basically working with a whole value chain, providing education, health services, and opportunities for a dignified life for communities that are stricken heavily by war and conflict for decades. So what I'm trying here to send is a message of basically to all who are skeptical about the opportunity of learning from really extreme circumstances, because the COVID pandemic just opened our eyes of treating communities differently, of cherishing and celebrating life above all. And I think it's precisely the message that Postobón and Bancolombia are capable of sending and teaching us all, because in a context of war, when life is so precious, they created ways of putting it to the fore. And I think this is what all businesses today with the COVID pandemic are trying to imagine how to do. And I would say, come to these countries, which we difficult emerging economies and maybe learn from them. Thank you very much. I give my word back to Juana at the moment.
Okay. Beneta, thank you very much. And it was wonderful to work in this chapter and the previous one together. Maybe I will add the other case is maybe it's a small case because it's not a very big multinational, Colombian multinational, but it's a Crepes and Waffles, a family-owned restaurant chain recognized for its good quality, for prices, and significant support for women. 93% of the employees are single mothers. And the company has traditionally been very responsible to the challenge related for communities. But what they did is that together with management, shareholders traveled the country to identify communities that have been affected by the armed conflict or where traditional lifestyles are challenged by development projects. And rather than forcing communities to adjust their production capacity to the company's needs, the buyers for Crepes and Waffles worked to redesign the menu in order to include the products produced by the communities. This is another example that how can a business model can innovate and adapt in a specific situation. And Lourdes, what are we going to do with China? Is our key question right now.
I'm talking to you, Chen. It's almost 1 a.m. in China. He has been trying for 45 minutes. Technology is a wonderful thing, and we are all together from Brazil, Switzerland, and Mexico, and Argentina, and US, Boston, and Ithaca, New York, but still he is unable to connect. We are trying to have like a video call and then put it to the camera. So we are trying. So I would say there are very interesting questions. Why don't we start with a question? If I may, I think there is a very interesting question that actually is chapter 13. So how can you measure? Because for emerging markets want, so you cannot talk about innovation without social inclusion, without seeing how the economic indicators of the country improve. We try to measure, and then I'll pass the word to Anne, but it's a chicken and an egg. Is the country growing because of innovation, or is the innovation the result of the growth? So is the poverty reduction because GDP growth, but it's that we know, and or innovation plays also one role. Is the whole purpose of chapter 13. We try to measure, because you cannot talk about innovation again without making sure that it's an inclusive growth. So maybe, Anne, you want to answer further this question?
I'll try my hand at it. It's basically one of the most challenging questions, as I said, at the moment, is how to measure innovation. But first, your point is a chicken and egg issue, actually. One of the conclusions that we can see is that basically all of the countries which have experienced a very good growth rates and which have emerged, whether we talk about Korea or China, for instance, they have had a very, very coherent innovation policies and very strong investment in R&D, I mean, the traditional way. Other countries, that was mentioned several times, as far as Latin America is concerned, the share, for instance, of R&D, the GDPs, really among very, very, very low comparatively. So you definitely, I mean, there is a link, and that's proven in the studies and case studies and research about industry experiences. There is a clear link between innovation and growth. But it's a chicken and egg, but basically there is no growth, and if there is no innovation or technological catch-up, that's the first one. The second one is how to measure it. I think the answer has not yet been found. That's why we still stick to the traditional metrics. I must, however, say that there has been efforts have been going on, for instance, in terms of trying to put in perspective not only the expenditures that you are putting in technological development and innovation, but also looking at the output. And the outputs, you look at patterns, but now there is an increasing trend to try to look at, for instance, the number of articles which are published in scientific journal, or the number of technology startups and so on. But these are still very piecemeal approaches. And that's why, and Ravi and other colleagues from the academic community can comment upon that. That's why we have not yet sorted out this issue. How do you measure innovation which is not, strictly speaking, quantifiable? And that's still, I think, a major challenge for all of us.
Okay, Lourdes, if you let me, I will take one of the questions, and it's very interesting because we are having questions from all over the world. And I will send a question to Veneta. This is a question from Brussels, from Jason Rocancio, is a PhD student of innovation. And the question is, who do you think behaves as the keystone in the innovation ecosystem in Colombia that promotes the merge of the such unicorns, since unicorns are not expected to appear in ecosystems governed by negative externalities?
I think the concept of ecosystem to a degree excludes the central role of an actor. So it's more the interaction of the actors and the way everything works, the financing instruments, the government regulation, the culture for entrepreneurial trials, the availability to have serial entrepreneurs in what we call smart money, who can be part of the process as mentors. All of these plus infrastructure, plus aspects related to how the local community, the local society perceives how the media talk about entrepreneurship. All these, we know, play a role for the entrepreneurial activities to be supported and for unicorns to be born. Certainly more active research agenda, more better funded and better, let's say, more dynamic innovation, national innovation system, better offices for technology transfer, all these help. But we don't have a deterministic model of why a unicorn happens, because we also have what is called black swans, right? That is extremely rare events that happen for reasons we understand very poorly. And I believe the great challenge for Colombia is to basically make the transition from black swans to let's say a pipeline of unicorns. And I think it's the ecosystem perspective that will help make this transition.
Lourdes, do you want to continue with the questions? Okay.
Sure. So there is also a very interesting question by Enrique Midman, who is saying that the vaccinations now in Latin America, as we all know, has been, and as Moacir mentioned yesterday, was unfortunately a tragedy, a record number of dead people because of COVID in Brazil. So how this pandemic is going to affect the innovation drive? As Anne said, innovation is always the result of government plans, collaboration with the university and the private sector, in a moment in which some countries are simply in survival mode. How do you think this pandemic is going to affect the performance of innovation in Latin America? Maybe Moacir, you want to answer?
Moacir, you are on mute.
Sorry, I'm joking there. To answer is a little bit difficult, but I can give some insights on these questions. I think every crisis, and when I have a crisis like this, we have face a lot of problems. But on the other side, some firms with the right competence, the right technologies can take advantage of that. For example, we are doing, like I said before, some research on business model adaptation of the Brazilian startups to deal with the COVID pandemic. And for example, some firms that have competencies for the contactless economy or digital marketing or digital retailing, they are having very good results. It's a pity that most of the firms are not doing well, but these specific firms are doing well. For example, we are facing, we are following the case of a Brazilian startup is on telemedicine. They have just started a huge project with the Secretary of the City of São Paulo to provide the access for all these medical services through smartphones. Not just that, but this is one of the facilities they are doing that. So firms that are some firms with specific technologies or competence, they are prospering in the crisis. We are in the middle of the crisis, so it's not that clear, but we can see these numbers, these positive numbers in some areas. Another example, there is another firm, is very interesting startups on the game industry. This startups is incubated in one of the 4 business incubators of the University of São Paulo, and they tripled the size since the beginning of the pandemic. So some specific industries and some specific firms with the right competence and technologies to this contactless economy for for digital retailing, digital banking, and so on, they are prospering. So I think that we have a different world after the pandemic. I think we are far from that. I think hopefully for 2022. But we did a huge change in the adoption of technology, and the world and even the education world where we work, most of all of us are professors, will not be the same. I think we accelerated a lot the adoption of new technologies in all areas, including the education areas. And after that, the pandemic we are not going back to what we had before. Probably we will have a more hybrid world with new technologies there, like we are using right now doing this event. Will be more common in your life, and something that will take 1 decade to happen has happened in just 1 or 2 years. And I think this year we are going to see big changes in this way as well. Additionally to that, there are some issues related to the global value chains. Some countries are trying to reduce the dependence on China, on East Asian suppliers, and who knows, it can be bad for one region, good for the region. So I think we are trying to understand all the impacts, but every crisis brings some opportunities as well. It's not that good speaking about opportunities in a so difficult moment, but this is what is really happening. We are seeing some firms prospering with the right technologies and competences in digital marketing, digital retailing, telemedicine, gaming industry, and so on. So big changes ahead, including the education industry in which we work.
Could I add something?
Thank you, Moacir. Yes? Yes, Fernanda.
Yes, just complementing what Moacir was explaining, we are working with a lot of digital companies here in Brazil. And what we see is that the COVID crisis had accelerated digitalization, as Moacir put that. But just to explain that, just 5 years ago, and we still have some companies doing that, the most investment they did was in infrastructure, servers, equipment, and all that. And with the COVID crisis, most of companies have accelerated the process to migrating their system to the cloud. And that gives a lot of agility. It's most of these systems are easily, the scalability is facilitated. So I think the difference in the infrastructure and how the business mode is changing, is the main influence of the COVID crisis. We had that the process was happening before, but was accelerated by the crisis. Just that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Moacir and Fernanda. I will take one for Ravi. This one is from sorry if I don't spell it correctly, Inijatek, from Uzbekistan. And the question is how pandemic situation due to COVID-19 may affect in innovation emerging markets.
I think we covered some of this already. I think Moacir touched on a lot of positive aspects of COVID, but there's also the negative aspects, I think. The positive aspect is that like any challenge leads to innovation, any problem results in innovation. COVID is a new problem. And I think for instance, the website I talked about on reverse innovation in COVID shows, tries to gather some ideas and that COVID itself has triggered innovation that other countries can learn from. But the flip side, the bad news, I think, is that everywhere it has slowed growth. And growth, of course, helps support innovation because entrepreneurs have to take risks. And if they feel positive and they see a growth environment, they're more likely to take risks. And the other part of the problem is the inequality has become worse in all countries and across countries too. I think COVID has affected the emerging economies, the poorer countries, more than it has hurt the developed countries. And the ability of developed countries to bounce back through stimulus programs is an order of magnitude higher than that of many of the emerging or poor developing countries. And therefore, a lot of the gains, some people estimate that the gains in poverty reduction over a whole decade have probably been lost in many of these countries in just these 1 or 2 years. So there's going to be a lot of catching up that has going to have to be done. And I think that is one of the reasons why the outlook for growth is, every country is going to report good growth numbers in 2021, much better than 2020. But a lot of that will still be catching up. And they will still not have catch up with where they would have been if COVID had not happened. So there's a deadweight loss for the whole global economy, more in poor countries than in rich countries. So I think that is a negative for innovation. If I can also touch on a question by Hasmukh Shah, which is I see in the chat box, and particularly I think he asked, what's the connection between innovation and growth? Look at the East Asian countries. Many of them grew a lot in manufacturing. And being from India, I'm sure he's thinking of India as a country that has not grown in manufacturing. So what's the use of being innovative in healthcare delivery if at the end of the day, you're really not capitalizing on the opportunities in manufacturing? And I think the response to that, Hasmukh, I would say that you don't need rocket science to grow the economy at 8%, 10%. You need a government that is competent in creating conditions so that private companies can set up shop and operate and grow. My own conclusion on China is the most important competitive advantage of China is the capacity of the government to create conditions that make firms more competitive globally. And I call that government created advantages, which is different from natural endowments of land or climate or population or geography or location. But government created advantages in China, for instance, in investing in developing human capital, investing in developing physical infrastructure, investing in industrial policy, and being able to navigate your way through a complicated global context of rules and regulations, and then shaping those rules and regulations. All of that capability which China has really excelled is the reason why China has done so well. Now they're also doing innovation, but that's again another deliberate government created advantage. The government is trying to keep up, update its strategy as the country gets more prosperous. So, but early on, for many of the countries we're talking about, the emerging markets, they can compete simply on factor cost advantage. The fact that labor is cheap. If you can just find a way, if India could find a way to attract a lot of the companies that are desperate to leave China and go somewhere else and diversify the production base and not be so dependent on China, India could create millions of jobs. But the inability of the government to create a context in which that'll happen is, I think, a key factor. So it's nice to have innovation. I think private companies in India are quite innovative. Indians are quite innovative in trying to get around all kinds of constraints, but that doesn't make up for enough for the shortcomings of the government in making India an attractive location from which entrepreneurial, innovative private firms can compete.
Thank you, Ravi. As Professor Ravi Ramamurthy mentioned, China is the time to say that Associate Professor Yu Chen is presenting his apologies. He's at the Institute of Science and Technology, Statistics and Analysis at the Chinese Academy of Science and Technology for Development, CASTED. Unfortunately, he has not been able to join. It's 1:12 a.m. in Beijing, and obviously the IT department of CASTED is sleeping, of course, and unable to help him. He's at home, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, technology works when it works, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. So he's presenting his apologies. So in relation with your comments, Ravi, I wanted to do a follow-up question. China has been, as you are saying, extremely successful in innovation, electrical vehicles, more and more artificial intelligence. We can mention this in so many domains that China is becoming the world leader in innovation. China also is investing a lot of South-South investment, both in Latin America and in Africa, and definitely Latin America was after Asia, one of the first destinations. So how do you think this is going to be some cross-fertilization between both? So the innovation usually we expect from US, from Europe, but now can come from China. Has it started to happen? Do you see it happening, this collaboration? We see plenty of research labs from China coming up in Latin America. So how do you see that? And I would say we are reaching the closing moment. So I would ask every panelist to say in a minute something, and again, related to that. So will China help to leapfrog, or how can Latin America, and this is one of the last questions I've seen by Daniel Benavides, how can Latin America catching up? Huh? So let's start by maybe Ravi itself, and then 1 minute, and then we'll move from Ravi to, let me see, the order.
Beneta.
Yeah, thank you. Ravi, you are in mute.
As I said, I think China is the most important story in the emerging markets on innovation. China is already innovating. China will innovate even more. China will not only be copying, China will be at the cutting edge of many industries. And it will have implications for not just other emerging markets, but for the developed countries. We are seeing the rivalry already playing out between, for instance, the US, particularly, and China on technology, what they call a tech war. I anticipate that will get even more acute going forward. And that's going to be the story of the next decade. Thank you.
Thank you. Beneta?
Yes, thank you. I will connect to Ravi's words about China and basically say something about what I expect or what I think Latin America can do, and in part is probably doing to some degree in a rather unorganized and maybe inarticulated manner, but I think there is some of it. So I think in terms of innovation in Latin America, if you look at the trends, well, these are a pretty kind of smooth lines. Nobody's making big jumps up and down. Therefore, it's a path-dependent process. So in this regard, I don't think the general trend looks very different for the future. But I think what can be done differently for Latin America is that they can actually pick their battles, see which are the industries and the segments where the entry cost is not excessive, where they do have some natural advantages in terms of population, in terms of the, let's say, biodiversity, if you want. And certainly education, I would agree with Moacir, is one of the domains for Latin America to be watched for the future. And I also would like to add something. I believe that Latin America, because of also the climate changes, which are already here, and the ways it has, the climate alterations have hit the equatorial region, the equator and the areas around it, definitely has to do something about its adaptation. So I would believe that in terms of sustainability and adaptation to climate changes are natural domains for Latin American businesses to adapt. And I would basically claim that there is some of it going on, but if it is done in an organized, well-funded, structured, and government-supported manner, I think there might be a great opportunity to have global leaders in this particular area.
Moacir, 1 minute. No, Moacir, you are in mute.
Oh, sorry. China is the main commercial partner with Brazil for over a decade. And as what I understand is there are a lot of complementarities in the Brazilian and Chinese economy. What I would say about China is that Brazil has to take advantage of selling to China, mainly, like you said before, what is in the agribusiness, probably investing more in value creation, not the raw materials, but the value creation. And in addition to that, I think Brazil can also take advantage of buying from China, but not buying the whole product, but parts for that, for the development of products in Brazil. We did a research some years ago in an electronic cluster in Minas Gerais, Santa Rita do Sapucaí. It's a small city, but it's the third largest receptor of research funding from the Brazilian agencies. And what they do is mainly buying from China and developing some specific products for security, automation of buildings, etc., etc. So I think that China has been the best idea to deal with China is look at China as a business partner. We also did a research for the Brazilian government. It was a decade ago. And when we went there a decade ago, there was started a big transformation of China, the Chinese production of low cost, low quality to high investment in research and development. And having said that, China is investing a lot. The investment in research and development in China nowadays is comparable or even superior in some industry to the United States, larger than in Europe altogether. So we have to see China as a partner, to see China, how can we take advantage? At least I'm thinking with the Brazilian perspective. Brazil is producing food for all the world, and I think we can take advantage of that to create more value. And when we buy from China, I think we can using that in the value chains of the Brazilian industry as well. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Juana, Lourdes, and the colleagues for the.
So I think with this very optimistic view, and at EMI we say building bridges and encouraging dialogue with emerging markets. So with these views in which emerging markets, we have covered emerging markets have become from copycats to leaders in a number of industries, and also the leadership of China, definitely. And in Latin America, going back home, going to the Rockefeller Center of Latin American Studies, who has been our host today, I think also the view that a very important stakeholder in innovation is academia, and we have here leading academics and leading academic institutions, University of Sao Paulo, thank you, Moacir, Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, thank you very much, Veneta and Juana, and of course, Faye from Brazil, and in the network, we have Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico and Universidad de San Andrés in Argentina. So all academics committed to the improvement of innovation in Latin America, doing their best to, I would say, counterbalance all this bad news that we had from Latin America, and we are still having this year. So there is a commitment to that the region will come back. And we have big news now, the oil at price before the pandemic. So maybe at the beginning of a commodity, a new commodity super cycle, copper and others. So let's hope that will help Latin America to give some breathing space. So I just want to, and of course, Professor Ravi Ramamurthy committed also to the research and to the help of emerging markets in innovation and others. So thank you all. Thank you also Fernanda and Anne, the partners in the book, and looking forward to continue the collaboration. And thank you, Juana and Dr. Klaas at Harvard. So Juana, the floor is yours.
I think I just want to thank you again for the enriching and insightful interventions. Thank you for the panelists, and also, as Lourdes mentioned, thank you for the optimistic point of view. Thank you, Dr. Klaas, Emerging Market Institute at Cornell, School of Management at Universidad de los Andes. And also, thank you to the audience and the interesting questions. They were very, very interesting, and we missed some of them, but we will try to contact to give an answer so that questions. And hope to see you soon in other events. I think you are going to receive by mailing list, and also you will have the recording of the presentation through Dr. Klaas YouTube channel. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing it. Thank you, Lourdes. Juana.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Jimena and Gabriel,
Gabi,
who have been with us behind the scenes and making sure. And thank you to Professor Yu Chen from China, who has been with us virtually trying to get into the webinar. Thank you all, and looking forward.
Thank you.